Buenos dias. As you can tell, I have dressed for Halloween. Consider me, if you know Charlie Brown, the Feels Right. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I don't envy you having to read through all of our CVs. I do appreciate very much the opportunity to come and to speak with you. Innovation in libraries is something that has consumed me since my very first position in academic libraries 15 years ago. And it continues to interest me, although I am no longer employed in a library. I hope that what my presentation will do is provide you some food for thought. I'll be speaking about research that I've conducted over the years, about how libraries have changed, what the perception is now of libraries, and how libraries are innovating in order to support research and researchers. We had a presentation yesterday where you were asked if you believed that libraries could operate as businesses. This particular chart shows you the amount of money libraries spend on content alone across the globe. And libraries clearly are big business. And while there have been several years of budget crisis due to the economic crisis globally, library spending is slowly rebounding. And what you can see on this chart is that academic libraries alone spend $4.8 billion on content. And of course, the amount spent on libraries increases when you add in the operating budget to that number. Generally, there's a continued shift from print to electronic collections across the globe, regardless of how poor or rich the nation is. It's an expensive change, and it requires investments in collections, in processes, and in staff. The consequences of the shift are many. Subject budgets are becoming increasingly rare as libraries acquire access to aggregated databases, as they participate in more and more consortial deals, and as they participate in more acquisitions models that require different kinds of funding and funding models. By this I mean that even the journal big deal packages are no longer being handled quite as they used to be, that bundled pricing is increasingly used, and the newer models like demand-driven acquisition and evidence-based acquisitions are becoming more and more complex. Libraries have increasingly felt pressure to prove their value as the cost of their collections and the cost of their staff has increased so dramatically. What was once seen as an innovation, the digital library, has become a seamless and visible presence to faculty and students. While they value the information, they don't realize what's provided to them, and nor do they care. This is made more complex as libraries are becoming comfortable with the idea that patrons can make buying decisions, and that libraries are no longer insisting on housing collections either physically or providing permanent access electronically. 2 years ago, I can remember presenting at a company meeting that demand-driven acquisitions, the notion that patrons can be responsible for deciding what books would be brought, was just an experiment. I recently had to go back to the company and say, well, no, it's something that not every library participates in, but it's no longer an experiment. It's an established model where DGA models are showing increased use over what librarians themselves have decided to purchase. So if librarians are no longer buying the collections, and the collections aren't anything that they know is bought for them, who are you? For decades, the library has served as the central place on campus, and librarians have generally received positive feedback. People like to like libraries. The findings of a recent SAGE study, where we collaborated with Loughborough University in the UK, showed that faculty perception of the value of the library is not even across the board. Some faculty are very appreciative and know what the library does. Others are less engaged and less appreciative of the work librarians do, and will be put off simply by library jargon. We've heard considerable concern from librarians that academics do not understand or appreciate all that the libraries offer to them or their students. One librarian told us, faculty know the library matters, but they don't approach it in the right manner. I'm not sure that faculty as a whole appreciate what librarians do or understand what they do. Part of the problem here is the notion that there should be a right way for faculty to understand librarians. Some academics do find it difficult to reconcile our roles, where they prefer the library that they grew up with over the library that they're now seeing. Others see an information-rich economy where they doubt the role of the library entirely. One business professor told me, if libraries aren't careful, they'll simply become a warehouse. I don't need a librarian to teach my students or me how to search. And if you see your main value as providing access to information, then there are many cheaper ways for the university to do that. The feedback I heard from the business professor is not been heard by all librarians, who, when asked, how do you think your faculty perceive of you, said things like, the faculty is not a place for the library is not a place for the faculty, but the services we provide are. Another said, academics believe that young people are inherently tech-savvy and don't need any additional guidance, instruction, or introduction to library resources. A librarian in the UK said, academics tend to rely on their liaison for teaching database and searching skills, but believe that they can teach the importance of using scholarly materials and evaluating resources. And lastly, a librarian said that for them, they saw great value from their faculty and felt great appreciation. So there's a completely uneven distribution of how librarians are perceived. In some part, this uneven success is a consequence of increased campus scrutiny, cramped campus spaces, and less demand of physical collections. Librarians are being forced to decide what they're going to do with all of their resources and with their spaces. Maintaining the space has changed in its level of importance on some campuses, where even at the University of California, San Diego, where there used to be 11 separate branch libraries, there is now one. Other libraries are moving services into their space as they move their collections out, including campus services like tutoring, test proctoring, writing centers, and teaching centers. Throughout all of this, there's more of an increased emphasis on the services and less on the collections. Reference, instruction, and provision of teaching and research materials for collection management and development used to be the way that the libraries were seen to support teaching and research. With the electronic era and the subsequent ease of access to information, libraries are now rethinking their services entirely, where core traditional services may still be part of the remit, but they are increasingly less common. Okay, so then what's coming in? There's an increased effort at research-intensive institutions to provide support for issues such as how to publish in open access journals, to provide support with issues such as bibliometrics, so how can you prove that all of that research that you did mattered, and that these roles, while you see them at some research-intensive universities, are not things that I can tell you will see in every library. Our research shows support for open access publishing by the faculty, where they're rather grateful to have someone help guide them. And I would expect for this to be increasingly true as the library budgets are pinched and providing access to traditional publishing is harder and harder to do. And as mandates are national for OA publishing. What remains unclear, however, is whether or not libraries want to be involved in these processes, whether or not they want to talk to academics about where to publish and how. Part of the issue is that researchers often project a self-sufficient image, and librarians don't feel confident about their own approach to offer this help. Also, librarians don't always know how to articulate that they have relevant skills beyond their traditional ones. Additionally, research support is very much dependent on the relationship librarians have established with researchers, either outside or inside of the organization. It's essential then for us to develop stronger relationships and ties with our communities. Okay, here's an example of one of the newer roles, and that's the data specialist librarian. This is born out of a lot of research that's been done over the years within libraries, trying to figure out where is it that there are gaps and where are the people who really need their help. The role of the data services librarian is to help researchers get more value out of their data through the organization, description, dissemination, and preservation of that data. The data services librarian works very closely with the subject librarians in the library to identify potential candidates. And then they speak to those researchers and offer very specific and individualized services. While speaking to academics about data curation isn't new, the approach taken for this role is indeed different, as the service is no longer provided as here's what you could do. It's instead a service where they do the work for the faculty. I'd say that while these roles offer a lot of purpose and promise, it's incredibly labor intensive and hard to scale. The benefit, though, is proven as the relationships not only encourage the researcher and further the dissemination of the research. As each one of those new relationships build, the relationship with the campus changes. I recently visited the University of North Carolina, and this particular picture is part of what they're now calling a research hub. And they took an entire floor on their library that's got loads of workspaces, and in the middle of it is this, which is a data visualization station. And so they can go and load the data and display it at 180 degrees. The research hub is intended to connect the researchers at their university with expertise, tools, and training to propel research in new directions. The real purpose, according to the librarians there, is to integrate the library into every stage of the research process. As one librarian said, we want to further research from cradle to grave, meaning from the beginning of the idea all the way through to the use of the idea. Okay, this is a concept map that a friend of mine at Wake Forest University came up with. And what it is trying to show, and I'm sorry it is so small, is how the interactions are within a university campus. And she identified themes from higher education literature, and it shows how complex it is within any organization to identify who are the stakeholders and why should they care. I believe that the key to keeping the academic library's centrality is to learn how the library can establish meaningful value to the parent institution. I also believe that the main driver in doing so lies with library leadership, which doesn't mean just the people at the top, but everyone in the library who will be a leader. So for us, having the support of and advocacy by our leaders is vital to our ability to succeed. Librarians must look at building value in a more global manner. They may search out and find currently unknown and unplanned. I'm sorry, I'm getting over a cold. My apologies. Okay, so they must search out and find currently unknown and unplanned intersections between different stakeholder groups, whether those are inside or outside of the organizations. And within that, look for ways to further the work of the researcher, not the work of the library. All right, so I'm going to start wrapping this up for you. Some suggestions for individual librarians. Develop your teaching skills. This is an essential way to develop your partnerships with your researchers. And it's one of the points raised by faculty members during our research, which is the more that they can see you as an expert, the more they will turn to you. Communication is central to the concept of improving the connections between the academic library and the researchers. Building strong personal relationships and dropping the dreaded library jargon in favor of language that resonates with the researcher's interests is essential. That means you need to get to know them and their language. In order to be able to speak in terms that resonate with them, you need to be seen as one of them. All right. Recommendations for anyone in the room who is a manager. Review your current librarian skills and be supportive of their need to change. That means that you may need to send them to more things, either virtually or physically, to help them get where they need to go. And it means that you need to encourage them emotionally. Review their current tasks and processes to identify things that you can stop doing so that you can free resources to do these things. There's an awareness and recognition that libraries need to collect evidence of value for researchers. Libraries are still struggling to illustrate their ROI, their return on investment. And it starts with a narrative, and it ends with a number that illustrates whatever it is that your organization cares about. That can be research outputs, it could be money spent and saved, or it could be even graduating on time. Lastly, I'd add that libraries must create cultures that allow innovation. Librarians must feel free to experiment, knowing that many of the times the experiments, whether short-term or long-term, may not actually show value. In this ever-changing world, libraries must know what core values they hold dear, but to let the value of the organizations steer the course. Throughout my career as a librarian, I have seen such differences in what makes one library successful versus what makes another library successful. It's completely based on where you are and who you serve. There is not a single learn your community's needs, know your value, and create your value and success based on a formula that matters for you. In this way, not only does the library succeed, so does the organization, and so does society. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elisabeth. She was very precise.